Hello, my druids and my darlings. My name is Awen, and today in this video, I'm going to be discussing the Dedicant path of Arnriacht Fane. I'll say that one more time. Arnriacht Fane, or simply ADF, our own Druidry. It's a modern druidic organization that I am definitely not being paid to promote, that I don't even represent, and they don't represent me. But I have been a member since I was 17 years old, and I am turning 28 this Halloween. And given the fact that I only recently completed the Dedicant Path journey for myself, I wanted to discuss what it covers, what it looks like, what I personally believe the merits and values to be, and generally just give you a completely off-the-cuff, rambling sort of discussion of the Dedicant Path and the value of even a touch of formality for someone who is so huge on the primal essence, on instinct, on intuition, on not getting too lost in the weeds of, forgive me, but just being an armchair Pelagian. Let's just come out swinging with that one. And the only real notes that I've got are, here's the basis of, if you can even read it, what the Dedicant Path covers. So I will rapid fire, not too rapid fire, spit that right out at you. Get ready, keep your eyes on the road if you're driving, buckle up if you're at home, and stay tuned. So the Dedicant Path covers, and I will elaborate on all of these once they're spat out, the 9 virtues. There's a segment on the high days, on writing essays on them, and also separate write-ups on your attendance of them. There are book reviews you have to do. You have to do an account of your home shrine. You have to write up about the 2 powers, meditation, trance, we will talk about that later. You have to do, at minimum, a 5-month account of regular cultivation of mental discipline. And I will briefly interrupt myself to say, when I started, back in my day, you had to do a whole year, and I still stand by that. At minimum 6 months, but realistically, why not go for a year and a day? But now it's 5 months, so oh well. Next, there is a write-up on nature awareness, having a relationship to nature as we should in Druidry, as I think we obviously do. The high day attendance, there's your understanding of and relationship to the 3 kindreds, which is the gods, nature spirits, and ancestors. There's a write-up on your particular cultural practice for the sake of the Dedicant Path by itself. ADF overall draws from basically any Indo-European polytheism you can draw from, take inspiration from, or focus on for the Dedicant Path. To me, that is already such a wide scope. Personally, Pan-Celtic is quite broad enough for me. But anyways, the last segment here is the Dedicant Oath Rite. Now, to prevent myself from just spitting out more facts and listicles and such like, I'm going to start out of order. I'm going to start at the end and start with the Dedicant Oath Rite. This is quite simply dedicating yourself to the path of Druidry, or at the bare minimum, dedicating yourself to the path of Druidry at least as long as it takes you to do the coursework, to do what others, and not myself, call the DP. So with that in mind, I initially did my Dedicant Oath Rite when I started. I started at 18. I suppose I'll veer off a little more into the weeds here and say, I am totally happy with the fact that I have taken the better part of nearly a decade to do this entire journey, this entire coursework, whatever you want to call it, because in my mind, there is no wisdom to rushing through this. The wisdom to it is building an active relationship with the fundamentals, the foundations of what makes Druidry today. And obviously, if you have ever heard me open my mouth before or will again, there are many other facets to this, right? But to get into what I consider the values to be, the merit, especially as someone who is huge on instinct, huge on intuition, huge on staying primal and wild, and remembering that we are pagan, that means keeping the sexy danger essence well and alive, and keeping your nose out of books long enough to put things into practice, and in them long enough to not be completely fucking insane, and hopefully to have a few brain cells to rub together, which is kind of a that's kind of an informal way to talk about what Druidry even is and what we're doing here. So I personally, I tend to recognize a couple of extremes that I do my best to avoid in my own practice. And this isn't just straight up shit talking, we're all human, my shit stinks too, I have my own problems, yada yada. But that being said, the two sort of pagan people archetypes that I don't draw inspiration from and don't resonate with me are, on the one hand, this sort of very anal, stick up your ass, armchair pagan, academic pagan. There's nothing wrong with reading. Scholarship is crucially important, as I will discuss. However, get your ass out of the fucking armchair. This is not a thought experiment. And that tends to become my problem with those people, is you develop this obsession with script, with only the written word, with only just kind of keeping your ass in your chair physically and otherwise. And as I love to say, because people apparently love to forget this, even if you are going for historical reconstruction, even if you are going for drawing inspiration from history in a more direct way, we don't know a lot about the original Druids. We do know that they had a taboo against using the written word as a crutch. And that is exactly what I see happening so often today. And it is exactly what I cannot stand and bores the living fuck out of me in every possible way. I have no time or patience for it anymore. So, on the one hand, you have that type of person who is either openly or might as well be an atheist. And then on the other, you have, and I know and love both types that fall under this, okay? People are built how they're built, and you have in my opinion, the deck you are dealt. However, the other side of this is the sort of like Lionsgate, yoni crystals, a lot of weed smoking, a lot of dreadlocks, a lot of I'm receiving downloads from the universe, and not a whole lot of like actual knowledge. And, you know, as with the other one, both of these extremes are not without their grains of truth, their grains of usefulness, right? Because instinct on the one hand is very important. Like, what good is the point of living in books to have all this knowledge if you're going to do nothing with it? On the other hand, to have your head so firmly up your own ass that you're basically just endlessly doing mental masturbation, there's not a lot of depth to that. And I think that if you really are someone that loves magic, that passionately loves magic, I see all of this as devotion. I see both my living, active, wild practice and my, dedication to learning as much as I can equally as devotional aspects. And I am fucking boiling, so forgive me. I can try and play these off as dramatic pauses to let you think, but realistically I'm just boiling. So anyways, those are the two sort of extremes that, while they have their functions, their importances, I think that we can do a hell of a lot better. I do not think that those are good places to stop. They might be good places to start. Me personally, as a teenager, I think my last real kind of jumping off point into, before I just went all out into explicit polytheism, was developing an interest in the sort of Jungian archetypes. And at first, I think I was like 16, 17, I started exploring it from just that sort of mythic storytelling perspective. Not that that's plenty magical by itself, but I had my little atheist phase, and in my mind, that's all I was doing. And then when I started really engaging with those archetypes, I found that they engaged back with me. And I have always been kind of brimming over the edge of the cup with, you want to call it spirituality, magic, what have you. I talked to fairies as a kid. Like, I have plenty of woo-woo of my own. Like, I have plenty of overlap both with the extreme woo-woo, patchouli-scented individuals, and hopefully just enough to have a conversation with those that are fond of their armchairs. So, to get to the Dedicant path itself, I think doing something like this, even if you are not a druid, whatever you want to call yourself, is very important to actually having more than just a label that you slap on yourself because you got tired of going to church or you like spending time outside. Like, whatever perfectly good reason you started with, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I had a rather vehement Satanist phase because I was tired of being forced to go to after school Judaism school for most of my childhood. So to my credit, the Satanist phase was a little short-lived because I realized I was just operating in the same mythology and I wanted to get out of it entirely. But the thing with it is, a lot of the time, the unfortunate part of the internet is we have all this information, right? We have these sacred texts, free PDF websites. You can read almost anything you can possibly imagine. But that's not what really usually happens when someone goes down the path of paganism or witchcraft. They might be hopping on YouTube, TikTok, whatever. And especially today, it's a whole lot of, your practice is valid and your altar is valid and here's my thing and here's my patron goddess. And it's like, that's all well and good. It's really not any functional information. Like, you're not working with anything of substance. Like, so something like the Dedicant path, yes, it's quote basic, but so many people just want to skid right past basic and they don't have that fundamental knowledge of, like, do you know what the high days are? Do you know functionally what they are celebrating, what they're engaging with, what they're revering? What would it look like to intelligently subvert that? Because that's another aspect too, where people kind of want to subvert what they imagine to be sort of conventions, even within paganism, but they lack the real understanding to be able to do that. For example, I've made a big deal out of saying this, it's not a secret, my patron goddess is the Morrigan. And I was reading a rather spicy, I'm just going to say like real schizo shaman, totally fucking batshit insane type grimoire. I don't even remember the name at the moment. But the author very interestingly called the Morrigan a fertility goddess. And I was like, that's fucking stupid. That's just straight up incorrect, wrong information. But then I thought about it for a second and I kind of read the tone around, the sort of surrounding information. I was like, this isn't wrong information. This is like, it's almost like viewing Dionysus as an initiator rather than just like the sexy, fun time drunk, forest god. So I don't really think that fertility goddess is what I would call the Morrigan right off the bat. But if you have the actual understanding of what is at play in that goddess, which is sovereignty, battle not for its own sake, but as the means to sovereignty, to self-determination, to dignity, to strength. And you look at the vitality, the sexuality, the vigor that is just hand in hand, that is her essence. That is crucially important. So she fucking absolutely is a fertility goddess in a manner of speaking. So I bring that up just to say, I am all for getting as weird as possible, but for a good reason, not just to be the problem. I'm really just speaking about edgelordiness of generally just wanting to offend people or just subvert things for their own sake. And as I found out from experience, being an edgy piece of shit kid myself, if nothing else, not only is it stupid, it gets boring very quickly and people are desensitized. And if anyone is left to be shocked, it's really not people in the pagan community, it's people on the outside. And at that point, you're just shock jocking. And I'm all for trickstering, but there's not a lot of depth to just shock jocking. So break rules after you know what the fuck they are. I cannot believe I'm basically shaking my cane around to say that. But if someone like me is saying that, hopefully you can hear that there's a little bit of something to be considered there. So now that I've spat that out at you, I will say I'll go back to the beginning of this list and read out what the 9 virtues even are. The 9 virtues, as ADF reckons them, are wisdom, piety, vision, courage, integrity, perseverance, hospitality, moderation, and fertility. Now, I believe I already have a video, like a full-length video going into all of these virtues in a lot more depth. It might have included even some of the stuff I wrote for my Dedicant path because I've been working on it for that long. So I won't do that too heavily here. I will say I tend to personally summarize the Druidic virtues for myself as just straight up hospitality and honor. And there is a note that you can include other virtues and compare them with the stated 9. I personally didn't choose to do that. I felt like 9 was plenty to go on, and I didn't want to afflict too much unnecessarily on whoever ended up grading my work. So you have your 9 virtues. The high day essays and the high days attendance, I do want to say it is so important to me to even have that requirement to say, hey, you have to get off your ass in some regard and actually ideally go to a group ritual at least 4 times a year. That is not asking too much, and just give a basic write-up. These are not all crazy long essays. Some of them are, I wouldn't say they're crazy long, they're just kind of average essay length or shorter. But the high days attendance, it's kind of a bite-sized, I don't have the exact word count offhand, but it's like no more than a few paragraphs at most, I'm pretty sure. And I think, as I just said, only 4 of them have to be ADF style. You can do them at home, you can do them solo, but I think that it is very important for people to have it in their head, like, hey, get out of my crusty, dusty room, get out of my typical understanding or experience of what ritual is, and actually participate, hopefully with some degree of pagan community in real life, because this is yet another, it's beyond a pet peeve, a serious frustration I have with a lot of these like heavily online so-called practitioners that have probably never even been to a ritual in real life, but they have a lot to say to you about what you're doing wrong and how they're basically, you know, the alpha and the omega of witchcraft and the whatever. And it's like, okay, have you ever done ritual, let's say period, at all, and then with anyone but yourself, and then with more than 3 people? That doesn't guarantee, of course, that they will all have something valuable to say, but it's a good place to start. So beyond that, let's continue just going out of order. For cultural practice, I still think that the fact that ADF pulls from the entire umbrella of the entirety of Indo-European polytheisms is insane to me. As I said in the beginning, pan-Celtic is plenty in my eyes. And to me, sorry, that's how I consider Druidry as Celtic mysticism, but I'm also pretty quick to say that I believe Druidry is a religious methodology, and you can kind of map that onto the cultural aspect is not necessarily really important if you're getting down into the actual magic plus knowledge sort of marriage that I touched on earlier in the video. And forgive me, I'll cut this out. So, cultural practice, you get the idea. You do have to read something specific to that. And the book reviews overall, I think, are very, very important. And again, as someone who's as big on instinct as I am. So you have to read, and I could be looking at the page on this, you have to read something specific to your own cultural practice. For me, I focused on Irish, to pagan history, period, and basically to mythological studies. I'm sure if you go to the ADF website, it'll say specifically, the wording might be a little different for the categories, but that's basically what they are in my experience. I chose, so like there's an approved reading list. You can't just read whatever you want. There are authors, such as Robert Graves, that are explicitly forbidden, and you cannot use towards your Dedicant Path coursework. Either because they're explicitly just shitty information, they're just bad, like Silver Ravenfluff type stuff. DJ Conway is, I believe, explicitly forbidden. But Robert Graves, I find it funny that he's on that no-fly zone list because he's not so much disinformation or misinformation as much as like, that was a lot of personal gnosis, that was a lot of poetic insight in his writings. And so you can call that pulling stuff out of your ass. I would call it just having an active relationship to your own magic. But yeah, to claim that whatever Robert Graves was writing about, the Celtic tree calendar, like, that's not a, quote, real thing in terms of what little we know historically and can trace, you know, even from, like, oral traditions. So I respect that they have standards in that regard. I just found it kind of funny. So for my own sake, I read A Brief History of the Druids by Peter Beresford Ellis. It's this big. It's very short. I thought it was potent. I thought it was accessible. There was plenty of great information. They had a chapter on female druids. Overall, I thought it was just quality info. I, years ago, read Margot Adler's Drawing Down the Moon, which I think really any modern pagan should read this book. It is a lot more than this big. It's, if I recall, it's got to be at least like 600 pages, probably more than that. And it is a really wonderful account of modern paganism, mostly in America, if I recall correctly, somewhat in Europe, somewhat a little bit outside of that, but mostly modern American Western paganism, sort of like the 60s and 70s, and just how we've exploded since then. And my biggest takeaway from it, honestly, was as much as I'm sitting here saying there's an importance to scholarship, don't, bully yourself into the armchair unnecessarily. Like, don't talk yourself out of doing things in real life or starting a group if you want to, or whatever it is that you feel called to do. Because some of the most famous, infamous, well-known pagan traditions started because some guy, like one guy, read The White Goddess and decided that he was ready to start a coven. And that's it. So, don't beat yourself up too much if you're feeling like you're ready to go. You might still learn on the fly. Hopefully you will. But that's the point of a lot of this. And I enjoyed reading about all these people that I had heard their names, like the origins of Dianic Wicca, which I don't fuck with at all. I'm way too into balance, and I'm not into gender segregation in that regard. But it was cool to read about the origins of like Z Budapest and, my own. I've mentioned, and I've interviewed Ian Corrigan of Arnriach's Fane, who I have so much respect for. He is on that same wave of like keeping trance in druidic ritual, of keeping that ecstatic element. And he made it sound a lot less dramatic than it appeared in the book, but for a little bit of spice, in Drawing Down the Moon, there's a discussion of Z Budapest, who started Dianic Wicca, which is ladies only Wicca, just the goddess, mind you. And she had this whole goddess chant, which you will still hear sometimes from my mouth around the fireplace. We all come from the goddess. I won't terrorize your ears with it right now, but I always enjoyed that Ian Corrigan of ADF wrote a sort of masculine counterbalance to that, where she says, fuck it, I'll just, for the sake of clarity, we all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain flowing to the ocean. It's very catchy, whatever. There's longer versions you can do. But I thought it was cool that Ian did a follow-up of we all come from the horned one, and to him we shall return like a spark of iron flowing to the heavens, or something like that. Hoof and horn, hoof and horn. All that die shall be reborn, corn and grain, all that fall shall rise again. So the book, if I recall, maybe I was just looking for drama. It made it seem like it was a little bit of a, men are cool too. But it was a pure moment of poetic inspiration for him. If you want to go ahead and dig up my interview with him, please do. But anyways, I think this stuff is well worth reading for many reasons. Another one of them just being, we have the cultural memory of goldfish at this point, but a lot of this has been done before. It's been talked about before. So that isn't to say don't act. It's to say let's be aware of the conversations that have already been had and sort of try to learn from, maybe some of their pitfalls, some of their oversights, and just do what we can, or continue to repeat history. That's fine too. So the high day essays, not just the attendance aspect, it was important to me to really get into what I felt to be the nature of certain holidays, not just to give like a generic Samhain, or as Murdoch would say, Samhain, is about the ancestors and it's a day for the dead. Like, that's cool. What do you really know about it? Like, anyone can memorize that. But I think it's kind of your opportunity to yourself to really show, like, what is my relationship to these high days? What is the wheel of the year to me? Because for me personally, part of why I started practicing seriously is on an energetic and emotional level for myself. I felt like, before I started practicing and whenever I kind of don't do the wheel, I felt like the wheel was doing me. And I think that that's a common experience for a lot of us that are drawn to paganism, and maybe folks that could benefit from it, is there are just times of the year where you are more reflective, more introverted, more down, what have you. There's times where you're in alignment with the earth and you're more active, you're more fruitful, you're more plentiful, you're more fertile, whatever you want to call it. And the wheel of the year, to work with it explicitly, was to me just my way of really navigating, this is me as a wild human being that doesn't belong being cooped up in, a cubicle or cities all the time. This is my way of staying aligned with what I am and, with the actual cycles of the earth, even if we're not farmers, even if we're not trying to be. I have no desire to do that. I had my whole phase where I just wanted to meet a nice guy and start a homestead, and then I thought about it and I was like, so I can just be a farmer? We're just being farmers at this point. Like, I don't know what that's proving to anyone. So God bless those that do it and live the dream. I think it's super cool, but it kind of, that charm wore off for me a little quickly when I thought about, like, having to find water sources and, like, building really anything. anyways. So let's go back to this list. We've talked about a little bit about the 9 virtues, the high day essays, the book reviews. So for the home shrine, I personally, you can include a picture of your altar or altars at home. I chose not to do that. I really am a witch as much as I don't observe a separation, but I'm a witch as much as I'm a druid. And I just think it's a bad idea to share pictures of your altar. That's another reason I don't understand that being this, like, endless source of content for so-called, like, witch talk type people or witch influencers. It's like, you will fucking never see my altars if they're anything more than decoration, and I tend to not keep altars for decoration. They're working. So you're not gonna fucking see a picture of that unless you're seeing something else. Anyway, the home shrine, I liked that it's basically, it doesn't have to be any specific way as much as it sort of reflects, like, how do you have a visceral, physical representation of the kindreds in your home? What do you have to reflect, to remind you of the ancestors, the nature spirits, the gods? And that can be as simple as some kind of plant life, a cup of water. It could be a statue. It could not be. I've gone through many phases where I'll go more kind of take everything apart, dismantle the altar, fuck the icons thing, to really liking the statues and liking that reminder on a physical level. But I think it's important because it raises the question of, like, what is your actual relationship with these things being represented in a visual way, in a physical way, in your own home? What does that mean to you? So even if you stick with what you started with, you at least have to ask yourself, hey, why do I have this statue? Is it because I think that that's what I need to prove I'm a pagan, to like collect all this fucking tchotchkes that don't necessarily mean anything beyond collecting dust? Which, if you have been on my Patreon, or if you've, gotten a drink with me for the past 2 years, this sort of phenomena of what me and my Bard-in-Chief have been calling Funko Pop paganism, I just find it repugnant. I find it deeply shallow. Like other things, sure, like, go through the phase of it, go through I get it. There's a rite of passage sort of experience to collecting the shit, the stuff. But that's where I am at this point of just, like, it's shit. It's this very materialistic, commercialized experience of what, you should be able to do with your own hands, some dirt and water. That's it. If you need anything beyond that, if you feel naked, I think you need to go back to the basics. Which isn't to say, mind you, that there isn't stuff that I like, but I think it's important to go through those phases of, like, why do I have this? Is this to just kind of make me feel better, to look a certain way, to stay on brand as whatever you think you need to look like to be a, quote, modern witch? Like, I am all for, wear whatever the hell you want, but I think there's this sort of costume aspect in a not entirely positive way that seems to happen, where people think that they have to present a certain way, whether that's wearing robes, whatever the hell it is. Mind you, I am a little bit, the one place that people kind of let their hair down sometimes with clothing, it's where I like to keep my hair up. To me personally, you won't necessarily see me in, like, robes or Ren Fair clothing or what have you. You used to. I definitely used to show up like I was going to Ren Fair to ritual because I've been doing this since I was a teenager. But for me at this point, I do still like to dress up for ritual because in my mind, again, all of this is devotional. And part of how I show up is like, I'm not going to show up in my sweaty, disgusting, like gym clothes or sneakers or something nasty like that. Me personally, I want the way that I present to be an offering to the kindreds, to the powers that be. And my relationship to the Morrigan, as, you know, I guess I'll just out myself here. I go out of my way to not necessarily wear symbols on my sleeve. That was part of one of those like sort of deconstructive periods of like, shit, do I need to be a Hot Topic model to be a witch? Fuck that. Like, why am I putting everything on my sleeve? Let's leave a little to be discussed. But one of the correlations to the Morrigan is simply the color red. And I like to keep that sort of vital aspect of her and of my practice represented, not necessarily in, like, I'm not wearing anything that's explicitly witchy, but I like to carry at least an amount of her essence when I'm doing something like this, when I'm out and about, when I'm at ritual. So that isn't explicitly related to the Dedicant path or the home shrine, but I told you in the beginning this was going to be a wandering video, so deal with it. Next up, we have, still out of order, the mental discipline aspect. And I could swear this was for an entire year when I started. And this isn't simply, oh, like I had to suffer so everyone else should suffer. None of this should be suffering at all. I mean, some of it will be kind of, you know, you will exert effort, you will strain, you will try, but it is to me, it's a delight to do so. Like, again, I do this because I love it. Because since I was a kid, I wanted to talk to the bushes. I wanted to make potions. Like, I wanted to thank the water nymphs for my shower. It's just, I love all of that living practice of magic. So anyways, when we talk about mental discipline, this again is just building your skills to be able to do ritual effectively, to be able to do magic effectively, and to be able to actually tell, like, all right, when am I basically just doing mental masturbation? When is this just kind of wish fulfillment and fantasy fulfillment on my end? Forgive me. And what do the gods actually sound like? What do the nature spirits sound like? How do I know I'm getting something from one of the kindreds and not just my brain is tired and I've been at work all day and part of my mind is kind of just farting at me and telling me what I want to hear or whatever. So I am a big believer in having some kind of building blocks. I can't do this at the same time. In that regard of like, if I were to make some kind of structured progression, it would be relatively neutral, even atheistic, secular meditation first. The Buddhists are great at this of like body awareness, mindfulness, presence. I only say Buddhist because that's being from LA, most of my experience with public just meditation, not in a ritualistic sense, has been in a Buddhist context. I think, so I've had a bunch of those experiences and I think they're very important. So I would start with something relatively secular and neutral like that, build up to more of that two-way visualization of like working with gods, nature spirits, ancestors, visualizing, doing a little more, using your imagination beyond just how does my body feel, where am I at this point in time, even delving into a little bit emotionally. And then beyond that, working up to trance, to full-on trance experiences, and perhaps being able to bring other people into it. Personally, that's something I love to do. It's not for everyone. And then beyond that, after all of that, do mushrooms. So that would be my sort of my escalator for mental discipline. But I really enjoy taking my time with this one, even though at the very beginning it was daunting and it was intimidating because you're sitting there like, oh, I really want, because I was a teenager and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to do all this. I want to get all this done, sort of, but also I want to enjoy it. And you see that year or 6 months or whatever it's, whittled down to. I saw that year and I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, how will is what I'll do, will that even be enough? Will that be good enough? Is that what they want? Like, in a year, it felt like a long time. And then you realize a year's nothing. A year is absolutely fucking nothing. And the benefit of having a large window of time is that you can fall into it. You can develop a real flow. And that, again, to just go back and forth from a stricter outline of the Dedicant path to the value that I see in it, the point of developing skill is so that you can enter a more flowing state, maybe a bit of imbos if we're going to get Gaelic with it, to have your own real relationship with all of this. And in my mind, the amount of skill you're really going to be able to build by doing nothing but just jerking it mentally it's not going to be that serious. So even if they've reduced it to 5 months, I say give yourself that time. Give yourself as long, at minimum 6 or 7 months, really at least kind of a year, to just fall in love with different styles, to try different things. And I really enjoyed getting to include all the different ways that I infused that mental discipline, that meditative and trance building practice into my own life. Because for those who might or might not be aware, I have a history as a professional dominatrix. And to be very clear, it never involved anything explicitly sexual on my end. I really saw myself as priestessing. And a lot of the time, I didn't do as much physical sessions as I was doing over the phone or over Skype or what have you. But there were, and kind of occasionally still are, just enough physical, what I would consider ritual sessions, where I would integrate, like using fire wands on someone and really involving, like, let's say the element of fire on a real elemental, visceral level, while simultaneously taking them through a meditation of fusing chaos and order and what fire, how that plays out in you spiritually and what have you. And to me, getting to have that play out both in my own meditations and my own trance experiences, and to guide other people through that in my ritual sessions as a Dom, in leading ritual with Raven's Cry Grove of Arnriacht Fane, that's the LA Grove out here, or just taking on, like, you can take on just one part, not necessarily lead the whole ritual. That will forever be my favorite thing to do, is to lead the two powers, to lead trance, because to me, that's where you really open that portal of creativity, of getting that two-way sort of feedback, and it's where you can get more immersive with things in a way that, like, I think unfortunately one of the drawbacks sometimes of public-facing ritual is you don't get as immersive, you don't get as trancey, you don't have those ecstatic experiences necessarily. Sometimes it can kind of just evolve into like pagan church and you feel like you're going through the motions, and I'm like, why the fuck am I here? Like, why did I stop going to synagogue for this? If we're going to just collect dust like that. But I think that keeping that element of really going past, how can I summarize it? Like stage directions of, let's offer this to this god. Like, let's just kind of give lip service. And it's like, no, bitch, get in there. Get all in there. So what I was initially daunted and intimidated by, I really eventually came to enjoy. And I really involved, and I shared this writing, like I get into the full thing. I shared it on my Patreon for Primal Druidry. So if you want to read the whole thing, it is less than the price of a cup of coffee. I live in LA, shit is not cheap. But my Patreon is, if you just want to read the blog posts, it's $3. You're welcome to read it. I greatly appreciate the support. But anyways, I generally involved, how I would incorporate that into my sessions. And really, as I started lifting weights, a few years ago, how that became a moving meditation for me, how that became a sort of two-way devotional trance offering for me, and just the different ways that meditation can look, which again, I think we have very stagnant ideas of what all of these things look like. And meditation is a huge aspect of that, because as much as I believe in building skill and being disciplined and what have you, you shouldn't be sitting around bored out of your mind, like past the necessary character building experience. I think that if simply, for one, just sitting around and trying to make your mind shut up, that's of course not going to work for everyone. And if you are one of those people who, a lot of the time, like me, who wants to do more than that, incorporating some kind of repetitive physical activity, something that you can do, but that you don't, like, you're not going to kill anyone if you kind of zone out or whatever. So I guess weightlifting is a little iffy on that, because if you're underweight that's too heavy, you can harm yourself. But I'm not, you guys, you can use your own discernment. I'm not necessarily saying trance out, go crazy, and kill yourself under a bunch of barbells. That's not, anyway. So mental discipline and the two powers, those essays are separate. But for me, at least, there was a strong degree of overlap, because the two powers is the primary group attunement meditative element of ADF rituals. And I believe I did another video that was specifically just on the core order of ritual within ADF, which I, to be very grateful, like I did and do draw a lot from, because I think there's good bones there, as long as you don't stay married to it, as long as you let it breathe a little bit. But the two powers is basically, Jordan Peterson might approve, a sort of exploration of the complementary values of chaos and order, and sort of being able to draw those up within yourself and have you as the mediator. And you see stuff like this in non-druidic witchcraft as well, where they talk about you are the one in the eye of the storm, you're in the center, as it were, you have choice, you can, harness these powers that already exist. And the two powers is, to me, like, so there is a script, and this is where I am again very grateful to Ian Corrigan, who presides at the Great Tridara with the lovely Leah Fall, who were very hospitable to me when I went for ADF's Wellspring Gathering. But he has done so much invaluable work in trance and putting his own audio meditations out there that I've listened to repeatedly. He's got a great version of the two powers, both in written form and, just speaking it out loud. And this is one of the benefits of really earning your training wheels by working in a group, by working in a public ritual group, even if it's public facing and all the things that I kind of, yap about and snip about at this point in time. I will always be grateful that I came up with Raven's Cry when I was so young, because that's how I learned. That's how I learned to put together rituals. And, as much as I criticize the script thing now, when I was a teenager, and, nobody starts out with all this stuff necessarily in their head. And if you do, then hit me up. I would love to work some magic with you. Most of us humans don't really do that. But when you're staring at, for me, when I would be staring at the script for the two powers that Ian Corrigan wrote out however many years ago, and you're doing this over and over and over, presumably you're going to, I've said this a million times and I'll say it a million more, it's not important to memorize the exact words, the exact verbiage, as long as you are internalizing the function, as long as you are memorizing what you are doing, not necessarily how it needs to be done. So I love the two powers. I still work it in my own rituals. It's super adaptable. So the two powers, my write-up on that and my write-up on mental discipline, those are separate, as I said. But, there's a lot of overlap and common ground. So I'll keep fanning myself and we'll move on. We have covered 9 virtues, high day essays, book reviews, home shrine, two powers, mental discipline. So nature awareness, this is a funny one for me. So when I started practicing, and really, so up until the point that I want to say 23-ish, 24, I was a diehard plant-based, vegetarian, some progressively vegan individual. So when I was a kid, someone told me that chicken nuggets were not just chicken shaped, but were made out of chickens, and I started crying because I was like 5, and I vowed to never eat meat. And I didn't for the longest time. And that progressively turned into veganism, and which really quickly devolved into malnourishment. And this is not a video about veganism or dietary choices per se, but I will say, to me, why I bring this up is there is a whole segment on nature awareness and your relationship to nature. And to me, as I evolved as a practitioner and in my own practice, to me, the idea of rejecting what I am as an animal, as all of us are in the animal kingdom, to me, I started to feel like it was not reverential of nature to reject the animal kingdom, to reject eating meat. I started to feel like it was a rejection of everything that I revere, everything that I see as divine. I was cutting myself off from it. So I went from fully vegan to a bloody red mouth in short order. And how that happened was, in effect, and you'll forgive me, I don't want you guys to catch me slipping too crazy. I was visiting my tattoo artist and his lovely lady on the East Coast a few years back, and he was taking me to visit a practitioner friend of his, and this gentleman runs kind of like a farm to table, hunted to table kind of restaurant, and he had fish that had been caught like that day by a close friend in a local river, and this man had put just all of his good, blessed, hospitable, blessing energy into preparing this fish. And there were no alternatives, and I'm not a whiner. At the end of the day, like, my parents did not raise me that ungratefully. But as I said, I was kind of already, if I was really dedicated to staying vegan, I would have not eaten at all. But I thought about it, and I was like, look, this man is pagan. So much good energy has gone into this. If there ever was an opportunity for me to break out of this and to start a new chapter, this would be it. So I had that fresh fish. It was sublime. And funny enough, the friends that, made that whole experience happen are pescatarian. So I'm a lot more meat happy now in my own progress than they still are, which is awesome. I just find it very funny. So I included that in my nature relationship writing because it is very important to me to, as much as I possibly can, it's not always going to be super possible, to eat meat that is locally sourced, to eat meat that is fresh, where I generally speaking know where it's from. And I got into this particular brand called Force of Nature that talks a lot about, I should know this, regenerative agriculture. And you can go to their website. I'm by no means an expert in any way, but I started eating them because they have a lot of bison, and bison is de facto not factory farmed, which, mind you, you can, and I included this in my essay, I believe, you can be a meat eater and still detest factory farming, still want no part of it, think that it needs to be fucking destroyed, and, we all need to eat what's close to our homes, ideally. So I just included, here is how, my consumption of meat is deeply intentional, deeply spiritual to me, how it relates to my practice, and how I keep it as literally primal as possible. And forgive the unintentional Liver King references. That motherfucker clown does not own the word. So, and there's, whenever I go out if I'm hiking, if I'm at the beach, I see trash, of course I'm going to pick it up. I'm also not going to pretend that I'm like campaigning for Greenpeace. Not everyone is an activist, and not everyone should feel the need to be. I've touched on that a few times before, and, given that honor and hospitality to me are the primary Druidic virtues, I think it would be extremely fakey and phony and just kind of gross of me to, because I'm being asked to do this like nature awareness essay, to suddenly pretend I'm some big activist. My focus is on being a primal priestess. My focus is on doing trance. My focus is on community. There are only so many hours in the day, and I personally want to just take this weird pressure and stigma away from the fact that, like, everyone who goes online, everyone with an Instagram account is basically being de facto pressured into, you need to have a perfect post and a perfect opinion about every issue everywhere across the globe at all times. And that kind of pressure makes it so you can never build your own opinions, so you can never develop real knowledge, and you kind of just get funneled into this like, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to perform and tell people what they want to hear, and, because I want to seem like a good person. And even if you have good intentions, I find that very fake. I think it's the opposite of honorable, and so I would rather openly say, yes, I do eat meat. No, vegans do not have a moral monopoly on paganism, and I've had conversations both before and after starting to eat meat with these very militant, dogmatic, just delusionally stuck up people who think that vegans have some kind of moral superiority, who think that basically being vegan is the only real way to be pagan or what have you. I have no patience for it. It's obviously not true. And as much as I'm a person who sees history as a trampoline and not a set of restraints, if we are going to talk about history and the original Druids, we have reason to believe the original Druids were eating people. So let's cut the fucking shit. There's, and mind you, I see that as an exception, not a rule, but that's for another time. I don't think they were doing it all the time. I think they did do prisoners of war in times of war when Rome was trying to annihilate them. So frankly, if they caught a few fucking Romans that were trying to push their shit in, by all means, eat your enemy and turn them into a public sacrifice. Turn them into a hex. Fuck them. That's possibly the Morgan devotee in me talking. But there are, I mean, to that point, though, to just a little bit more, we have, from the little that we do have, there are rituals of divination involving, full-on slaughter of cattle, wrapping yourself, I'm getting a little bit ahead. Slaughtering cattle, full on bathing in the blood and the meat, and wrapping yourself in its hide, in its freshly steaming hide, and then doing divination so that Druid would see the future of kingship in Ireland, to see who the next sovereign would be. So fuck off with the veganism, moral superiority, spirituality shit. It is not true. If you want to do it, keep it to yourself. I'll get off that soapbox. So we've covered quite a bit. Nature awareness. The three kindreds, and this is kind of wrapping it up, so I'll just devolve into pure ranting from here. The three kindreds, as I said in the beginning, are ancestors, nature spirits, and ADF calls them the shining ones. I say deities, period, because shining ones does denote, pardon me, that we're talking about, quote, bright gods, the same way that there's like the Seelie and the Unseelie court. I personally would not call all of the deities that I have love for and have a relationship with bright. Again, Morgan, like, sure, you could kind of hit it from the back, as my bard says, and get into like, is a god shining or bright because they can be life affirming? Personally, that's not a rabbit hole I feel the need to go down, at least at the moment. So I call them deities, but those are the three focuses. And I will just include in this video something that I include in, I included this in my essay. I've included this in every single time I've taught or talked about the topic in public at all. People have this very uncreative, fundamentalist, just unimaginative concept of what they think, my hair is shedding everywhere, what they think the ancestors are. And people get all bent out of shape of like, what if your ancestors are bad people? And it's like, darling, we're pagan. I'm going to ask you to use your comparative mythology lens for a second here. I'm going to ask you to think like an actual pagan for a second. And let's just think about that. Can you literally see a fairy flying around? Can you literally see the visceral, physical effect of whatever spell you just cast? And just go along with the example here, like miss me with a contrarian, yes, I can physically see them. What I'm saying here is, think like a pagan. It doesn't have to be your literal flesh and blood ancestors. And also, when we say ancestral reverence, this is its own topic, that doesn't mean worshiping every single thing that anyone has ever done. And again, I catch all kinds of shit because I don't necessarily have some list of like beliefs. I don't like dogma, but what I explicitly don't like is this very splitting episode, like fucking black and white thinking, just full on, like you're either all good or all bad, and everything is so extreme all the time. And people inject that it's a deeply unpagan, uncreative way to think into something like the concept of ancestral reverence. And I'm like, why are the conversations we're having on this so stupid? Why are they at such a low intellectual level? And I get to answer my own question. Part of it is we think it's gatekeeping when we tell people, hey, you should fucking know what the 8 high days are if you're going to shoot your mouth off about being a pagan. You should know what your relationship to the gods, nature spirits, ancestors, whatever you personally revere, what that even is. You should have some working knowledge. So I personally just you cannot expect to be taken seriously by actual practitioners if you don't have that kind of knowledge. And if you're going to carry on at the level of somebody that just wants attention on Twitter, like I hate to even give it attention, but when I knew in my heart of hearts, in my bones, that just because someone calls himself pagan doesn't mean I have anything in common with them, is when this very bored Midwestern gay kid, God bless, full on bless, went on this crazy tirade about how if you're white, you don't have ancestors, you have colonial oppressors, and they need to be fucking rejected. And it's like, whoa, okay. And obviously he got a ton of attention, which is probably what he wanted. We love to see it. We love a queen. But that's what I'm talking about with, like, okay, dude, have you even done ritual with other people? Have you ever thought about this creatively as a witch in any depth? Because, again, what is ancestor? Let's just get into it. What does ancestor even mean? One who came before you on the path, one who walked before you. So that can be a teacher, it can be an elder, it can be a mentor. But even within the realm of people in our own family, I'm not sitting around getting on my knees, bowing down to my ancestors or co-signing everything they've ever done any more than when I have friends, I'm co-signing every single thing they've ever said and whatever. Like that's the kind of puritanical fundamentalism that I fully reject. And that's not why I'm a pagan. I did not leave. So I have one Christian parent, one Jewish parent. I lovingly say they're both fundamentalists in their own way. I didn't reject both of those paths to replicate it with the goddess. Like, that's not what I'm doing here. So I fully reject that. Lord have mercy. So it continues to be very hot here. And I'm staying in a very beautiful cabin that has no ventilation for the night. But I digress. So if you have any coffee, take a sip. I'll cap off that sort of tirade with just saying, ask yourself, what is it to think like a pagan? And with something like the ancestors, if we are looking at our flesh and blood ancestors, what can we learn from their lives? What can we learn? And I view the gods in a very similar way of to not replicate everything they've ever done. That's batshit insane. It's very often a terrible idea. But how can we learn from their experiences, from their examples? So try to just step outside the sandbox a little bit. And to go back to the point I think I've just been continuously making this whole video, I think stuff like the Dedicant path is very important for learning the rules if you intend to break them, for developing some kind of familiarity with, what sort of the royal we of modern pagans have decided we're going to focus on. And again, you don't personally have to, pardon me, caffeine burps, you don't have to do it in the same way. You don't have to do it in any particular way, but I do want to really advocate for at least a temporary period of time, letting yourself be a student, letting yourself be an apprentice, do something in a way that doesn't necessarily adhere to all of your own inklings and orientations, and let yourself build some calluses and you can do what you want from there. So this is sort of, again, this is a general commentary from me. I just wanted to talk more about it because I don't, to be very honest, I don't, as I've already said, I don't like the low intellectual level of conversation that you see on so-called witch Twitter. These are a lot of people that need to go outside. These are a lot of people that need to do ritual with other people or connect with community. Which isn't to say, like, I'm not just shitting on everyone, but this is the peril of the internet, period. Of, like, any subculture, any scenario where people are so terminally online, you just start circling the drain and repeating the same things. And what people are calling discourse is just the same reheated Walmart tier, take that somebody probably discussed in more depth in the 70s. So I would just like a better I would like just, this isn't from a moralism on my end. This is what's endlessly funny to me is sometimes people hear me talk and they hear me being very bitchy and cunty and jaded and whatever, and they think that I'm somehow conservative, which is hilarious. They think that I'm coming from my moral high horse on the mountain. What I really want is a better class of degenerate. What I want is more quality perversion. What I want is meaningful transgression. What I want is serious, immersive, ecstatic wildness, but from a serious place, from a place of actual love and actual passion, for love of knowledge, for love of magic, and not just like, oh, let me like collect labels to look cool on the fucking internet, which Jesus Christ, I will try to control my like cane waving, but it's the opposite of moralism on my end, and more just like, make it count, do something that matters. I'm so bored. And that truly is why, I have a lot of love and a ton of gratitude for Arnriacht Fane, and I will probably stay a member forever, because you can be a solo member. You don't have to be affiliated with any particular grove. But I think it's, again, with the black and white thinking, you don't need to join a group like ADF thinking, oh, this has to represent everything I've ever thought or everything I do in my practice. It does not. It does not in any way, shape, or form. It can just be something, valuable on a community level that has, so there's the Dedicant path, and there are other scholarly sort of course. I know a friend of mine is doing the advanced general. I'm just making stuff up at this point, but there's stuff like the Liturgist Guild. There are different guilds of people that specialize in different druidic skills. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of, not to put their business on the street, I got some cranky, heavily stick up their ass responses from one of the people that reviewed my Dedicant Path coursework, which kind of, it reminded me like, oh, this is why I don't like institutions. This is why, because I think past a certain point, when things become too bureaucratic, forgive the heat stroke, it robs the magic, it robs the vitality, it robs the sort of vigor from what I love about Druidry. And to put a ton of love into something only to hear like, you went 20 words over, so fucking you're like, I'm not going to get into it. That kind of response, it wasn't all of what I got, to be very clear, since I guess I'm talking about this. Most of the responses I got were from someone who was super awesome, who was super sweet, who was very encouraging, who said things like, hey, you clearly are very passionate about this. You're clearly very enthusiastic about, having a personal relationship here. Thank you for sharing, what have you. That I greatly appreciated. And, feedback is important. Critical feedback can be important. But to have a massive stick up your ass because I didn't because I didn't see a word limit when I was passionately writing, however many words over about the 9 virtues of all things, I just thought was like, okay, the fuck are we doing here? Nobody, because this is the thing. You don't have to do any of this. And hopefully this is the point to me talking about that at all. Even within ADF, you don't have to do the Dedicant path to be a member. And personally, I think you should. I personally think we should make people work a lot more than they do, because you would have a lot less of people just shooting their mouth off who have no reason to be fucking doing so. Who should, this is the point of extremes, is that people on either side have plenty to learn from each other. I would love to put all of the woo-woo, Yoni Crystal girls and the stick up their ass armchair academics on an island somewhere. So maybe, hopefully, they would come out just balanced people, because we all have plenty to learn from each other. I've touched on this in other sort of writings on Patreon, but personally, to talk about even mental discipline, it took me years to even consider touching mushrooms, because I was like, I don't want to cheat. I don't want to, cut any corners. I want to know that I can meditate and do trance and do all this for myself without, a sense of cheating or not earning it or not being ready or what have you. And I do think that that's very important. But as I kind of said earlier, with my whole escalator of those sort of experiences, you should, or at least, I don't know, if you're built at all similarly to me, you are going to reach a point where it's like, okay, yeah, I know I can do it. And one of my thoughts after doing, and for the record, I do not do mushrooms often. I do not do them recreationally. I would be miserable. I will only do them for ritual purposes. I tend to only do them for the 8 high days, or if I have a very, very compelling spiritual reason, obviously, on a full moon or new moon or something like that. But I don't do them for shits and giggles, and frankly, I don't even like to be around people. I'm typically so heavy in my own workings and my own trance. Pardon me. I'm a rambler, once again. So if you are still here, if you are still listening, God's bless you. I appreciate you greatly. I will really just talk until I've run out of breath. But yeah, I think the overall point that I was trying to make is simply, that's one of the virtues, literally, is moderation. So fuck it, since I've gone over the basics, I'm gonna just share some of my thoughts on what the virtues even are. So, and again, this is off the cuff if you want to read what I actually submitted, and most of which was very, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining at all. I got one cranky response out of many delightful ones. Everyone gets their period sometimes, whatever. So, alrighty. Wisdom, piety, vision, courage, integrity, perseverance, hospitality, moderation, and fertility. Now, an obvious connection would be to try and connect something like mushrooms to vision, but that's kind of not the point. In my view, ADF, when they're talking about vision as a virtue, to me, you're talking about having a larger sense of perspective. That's not quite the same thing. I would connect it actually to moderation, because there is a difference between, having spiritual experiences and doing things magically and just frying your brain at Electric Daisy Carnival or whatever people are doing. So, wisdom, piety. I'm gonna cut this part out. So I think I've kind of discussed okay. I got so heated that I lost my train of thought. I think I'm going to cap it off here. Overall, I think I've discussed what I wanted to discuss. If you are at all curious about approaching Druidry and you don't know where to start, ADF is a wonderful place to start. They have groves and proto-groves, and if not, you can start one pretty much, I don't want to say all over the country, but in most states. And the beauty of it is, if you don't have a grove in your area, and even if you do, you can start a proto-grove of your own. Look into that for yourself. But if that's not remotely where you are and you're kind of just looking for somewhere to start and you're kind of working by yourself, again, what I like about the Dedicant path is that it kind of just gives you a structure to build basic familiarity and basic knowledge of what we are even working with in Druidry and in modern paganism, kind of period to some degree, and then you can do what you will from there. So I appreciate you guys. I think that if I were to go on any longer, I would just be rambling about nonsense or very unrelated things. So I want to thank you especially for tuning in. I am really not the world's most consistent person with this stuff, because where I am oddly traditional is that the original Druids, as I said earlier, explicitly did not believe in writing things down or kind of recording the knowledge. And as much as I believe in sharing things like that out of passion, I don't like to do it. I like to speak in person. I love teaching in person, but I don't like to record it. And why, even if I sometimes say I will and then I don't end up recording my in-person classes, it isn't that I don't care. I do. It's just that it takes away my energy from the people that are present. And so I am recording this. Who knows when I'll release it. I'm recording this before I will be giving a talk on my patron goddess, on the Morrigan herself, the Great Queen, at Pagan Pride 2024, which I am very thrilled about. And I'm honored again because I was asked by a fellow ADF, we would say Grovey, to speak to Raven's Cry Grove, but I'm not really in the Grove anymore. Anyways, I was very honored to be asked to speak by her since she's on the committee. And anyways, you can see me there. I will not be recording it. It's a long way of saying I will most likely not be doing a video of it because it takes me out of the moment. But what I will most likely do is, keep the general material, write down overall what I covered, and do a separate version for YouTube and or Patreon, where I can focus solely on the camera, on this weird one-way conversation thing that we do, and people develop funky parasocial relationships around that I won't speak to at this point in time. So anyways, for the last time, for real this time, thank you for joining me. I'm gonna go jump in a cold shower because there's no air conditioning in here. I so much appreciate your time, but now it is time to put down the phone, close the laptop, put your screen away, go outside, and go do some magic.